Thank you, Amina Khan, for joining me for a discussion about the ongoing tensions between the Afghan Taliban and Pakistan. You are the director of the Center for Afghanistan, Middle East, and Africa at the Institute of Strategic Studies, Islamabad. You have edited 5 books, three of which directly relate to Afghanistan: The Evolving Situation in Afghanistan, International and Regional Perspectives, published in 2022. The Return of the Taliban, International and Regional Perspectives, published in 2024. And the Transnational Terrorism from Afghanistan to Africa. You wrote your PhD dissertation on the Afghan Taliban, so I guess you have been following Afghanistan very closely for about 19 years or so. Let's begin with an overview of what has been happening between the Taliban and Pakistan over the past two and 3 years since 9 October, when Pakistan carried out air strikes in Afghanistan capital Kabul and Paktia province. Since then, the Taliban and Pakistani military have engaged in a series of other cross-border fighting. For example, on 15 October, heavy fighting took place in Spindoldak. 2 days later, on 17 October, Pakistan conducted air strikes in Paktia province. Can you help us understand the background to this escalation and what triggered it?
First of all, thank you for having me. You put me in a difficult position because it's not easy to speak about the Pakistan-Afghanistan bilateral relationship. I've always said that it's a very interdependent but very complex relationship. And hence we see that even 20 years down the line, the relationship is as complex as could be and, as difficult as it is the situation that we're currently facing. Coming to your question, look, let me just say that post-August 2021, when the Afghan Taliban de facto authorities took over in Afghanistan, Pakistan, you saw, was at the forefront, whether it was in terms of the evacuation process or even the humanitarian assistance. But I think more importantly, in terms of regional engagement, I think Pakistan was very forthcoming, where it was saying that, it was time for the international community to engage with the current dispensation in Afghanistan, not only for the people of the region, but more importantly for the people of Afghanistan. So Pakistan was very much at the forefront, and we saw even in the bilateral relationship, relations did improve. Trade was at its peak, more, by the way, in favor of Afghanistan because we were importing coal. And of course, our transit trade with Central Asia increased by about 70%. But unfortunately, since then, we have seen, a downward in the relationship. And this primarily has been because of unfulfilled expectations, primarily the inability of the current dispensation in Afghanistan to deliver on their pledges of reform, primarily on counterterrorism assurances. You've seen that since August 2021, there has been a spike in terrorist activities by the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. And of course, this has, triggered the relationship for the worse, where we have seen an unprecedented, increase in casualties, primarily for security forces. And I think this is one of the reasons why we see the relationship now at its lowest, because the Afghan Taliban have not been able to deliver on the one pledge that they themselves agreed to, which was that they would not allow any terrorist entity to operate from the Afghan soil. Now, I know we have been hearing from the Afghan Taliban that the TTP does not exist in Afghanistan, that they do not support it, but I think, events on the ground suggest something else, primarily because if we go back to August 2021, soon after they took over, they were able to help negotiate an agreement between Pakistan and the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, where we saw a very brief ceasefire between the TTP and the government of Pakistan. But then in November 2022, again, the TTP ceased, or rather they continued with the hostilities and they put an end to the ceasefire. Also, the Afghan Taliban say that they don't have leverage, but the fact is that if they were able to bring about a ceasefire, if they still offered to relocate the TTP and they still offer negotiations, this means that they do have leverage. And this also shows that the TTP is very much active, sadly, in Afghanistan, and it continues to attack, security forces in Pakistan. So this is where the situation is. And unfortunately, as you can see, the relationship is at its lowest because of this very particular issue, which primarily revolves around security.
Okay, just on that, on 8 November, the Taliban's chief spokesman, Zabihullah Mujahid, first of all, he said that the TTP existed before the Taliban's capture of power in August 2021. And then he listed like several actions that he claimed the Taliban had taken since seizing power. I think three of them that stood to me were relocating tribal refugees living near the Durand line.
Mhm.
That's quote, whose presence caused concerns in Pakistan to central areas within Afghanistan. Second, issuing fatwas forbidding individuals from leaving Afghanistan to engage in jihad abroad without authorization from their leader, Mullah Hibatullah Akhundzada. And finally, supporting conditions, as you mentioned, for direct negotiations between the Pakistani government and the TTP. Uh, in fact, the Taliban believe they have done their part and the rest is Pakistan's internal matter. And there is also the suggestion that the TTP and the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement or PTM are simply two different responses to long-standing grievances of the Pashtuns in Pakistan. And the Taliban spokesman Mujahid said that the end of October that Pakistan wanted to pave the way for the return of the United States to Afghanistan, which in turn wants to regain control of Bagram Air Base. So the question is, what else does Pakistan want from the Taliban? Does the TTP issue not require an internal political solution from the Pakistani government?
Mhm.
And do you see any political influence at play in Pakistan's positions toward the Taliban, as Mujahid claimed that the Pakistan is playing on behalf of the United States?
Okay, well, first of all, I think let me start with your last point about Bagram base, because we have been hearing a lot, from Kabul over concerns that Pakistan is helping, Washington in its aspirations to regain the Bagram base. I think the United States doesn't need Pakistan's help in this regard because they have a direct relationship with the Afghan Taliban, and we've seen this, numerous times. Yes, it's a transactional relationship, but it certainly exists, and we've seen it whenever there is an exchange of prisoners. They directly engage with the Afghan Taliban. Besides, they're still the largest contributor in terms of developmental aid, and that certainly doesn't come through Pakistan. It goes directly to Kabul. So uh, I think this is slightly disingenuous of the Afghan Taliban to say that Pakistan is interested in helping the Americans regain the base. Coming to the TTP, let me be very honest with you. When we say Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, this means that we need to take ownership because they are Pakistani Taliban. There is no doubt about it. And certainly it is a Pakistani problem and Pakistan needs to deal with it. And Pakistan has been dealing with it in its own way. But at the same time, and when you have a neighbor that is enabling the movement of this particular group, it does create problems. And I think what Pakistan is expecting from Afghanistan is not something extraordinary. It is simply asking the Afghan Taliban to adhere to those, you know, pledges of reform that they themselves agreed to, which was not allowing any terrorist entity to operate from Afghan soil. Now, again, we're going to get into this vicious blame game of, whether they're allowing it to happen or not. But I think, numerous United Nations security reports also talk about how the TTP have been empowered. And I think it is important to understand and differentiate when we talk about the PTM and the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. The Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan does not have popular support or does not have a popular support base within Pakistan. If they did, they would be very easily able to take over because whenever you have a movement, unless and until you don't have domestic support, you really can't flourish. And initially, if we go back to 2007, when they initially did come to now erstwhile Fatah, there was popular support for them because they, promised speedy justice and whatnot. But once they showed their true colors, the domestic population turned against them, including the tribals. And another distinction I think we need to make regarding the TTP is that their goalposts keep on changing. What is it exactly that they want to bring about? First, they were against the state of Pakistan because we were a part of the so called war on terror. Then they said they wanted to establish Sharia. Now, what kind of Sharia are we talking about? Because if you see, yes, we are the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, but we don't follow strict Sharia in its true sense. And then again, there's a question mark over whose interpretation of Sharia. And does the domestic audience actually want Sharia in the tribal areas? I think we need to distinguish between the conservative nature of the people and Sharia. There are two different things. And also now the last demand of the TTP is that, they want the reversal of erstwhile Fatah. So how do we take a group like this seriously? So yes, it's a domestic problem. Pakistan is dealing with it. I still think that there needs to be a concrete and comprehensive debate within Pakistan on what to do with the TTP. In the past, we have seen negotiations, we have seen certain TTP members becoming a part of the mainstream. I know this is a very unpopular topic to deal with in Pakistan when you talk about the concept of negotiations. I still feel that certain elements within the TTP can be approached, and I think there should be negotiations because kinetic operations is not necessarily the answer. But again, that's a Pakistani prerogative, and solely it lies with us. But then the Afghan Taliban certainly do have a responsibility, and unfortunately, they're not fulfilling that responsibility. And yes, the TTP came into power, or their inception dates back to 2007, way after the creation of the Afghan Taliban. But the Afghan Taliban cannot deny that the TTP did play an instrumental role in their insurgency, and they do take ideological inspiration from the Afghan Taliban. Certainly, they cannot be equated, but they do take inspiration from them. So I think the Afghan Taliban need to make a decision, Ali. It's a difficult decision, but they need to decide. They can't have, the best of both worlds. If they want to be accepted as a responsible member of the international community, they have to adhere to certain norms and regulations. Or if they want to continue to appease terrorist entities like the TTP, it's very temporary. And I tell you, it's a matter of time before the TTP eventually will turn against the Afghan Taliban because the TTP are not religious in any sense of the word. They're mostly crooks and criminals that actually jumped on the bandwagon of this whole Taliban concept. So I think it's important for the Afghan Taliban to realize the responsibility they have. And we are not asking them, what have we been asking them for the past 4 years? We've shown a lot of strategic patience, but when we have these high casualties where the TTP is constantly killing our security personnel, there is no justification for it. If the Afghan Taliban were fighting, they were fighting against foreign forces. What is the TTP fighting against? They're not foreign forces, they're Pakistani soldiers that are defending their country. So I think, the whole dynamic needs to be understood, and there has to be a difference between the TTP and the PTM, and this is something that I think we tend to confuse, or rather, Kabul seems to be confused about.
Yeah, just going back a little bit, you mentioned that there was an escalation or intensification of attacks in Pakistan before the start of the ongoing tensions. But about 4 months before the uh, Pakistani airstrikes in Kabul, like
Mm,
on 13 May, Pakistan's foreign minister announced that Pakistan would upgrade its diplomatic mission to an ambassador level, and the Taliban welcomed the decision and reciprocated. What happened during these 4 months between the end of May and 9 October?
mm,
And I think one theory is that it is because of the warming relations between the Taliban in Afghanistan and India, and Pakistan's airstrikes in Kabul and Paktika on 9 October. Uh, it took place like hours after the Taliban's foreign minister Amir Khan Muttaqi arrived in New Delhi for his first official visit to
mm,
India.
mm,
So it really did not seem to be a coincidence. Why should Pakistan prevent the Taliban that claim to be the government of a sovereign state from establishing relations with India?
mm, mm. No, first of all, let me just clarify. I think, people seem to forget that every single day before, FM Mutaki's visit to India, we had major incidents across the border where every single day Pakistani soldiers were being killed. It's just another issue that this was not being reported. If you look at mainstream Pakistani media, and I encourage you and your viewers to do so, to do their research, you will see that we had several attacks where we had more than 10. I think the last attack was, I think it was between 16 to 18 soldiers that were martyred in attacks, and hence you saw this reaction from Pakistan. Let me just clarify on the India equation, because this is something that time and again comes up, regardless of whoever is sitting in Kabul. Look, I think in the past, certainly, you've had these concepts of strategic depth and whatnot. Pakistan just expects to have a friendly government in Afghanistan, a non hostile government. But this does not mean that Pakistan wants to dictate or dictates Afghanistan's foreign policy or foreign relations. Afghanistan is a sovereign and independent country, and it has the right to engage with any country as long as it's not detrimental to the role of any other country. I think this is, fair to say. I think this was completely blown out of proportion, because before that, if you see, you did have the trilateral meeting that also took place between Kabul. In fact, FM Mutaki first traveled to Tehran, where he attended the Tehran Dialogue Forum, and I was there myself. And then he proceeded to Beijing, where they had the trilateral meeting, if you remember. And then after that, they had then another trilateral meeting in Kabul. And I think the concerns initiated because usually, if you see the trajectory of the China, Pakistan, Afghanistan trilateral, there has always been a joint communique in which all of the three parties have talked about ETIM, TTP, and CPEC's extension to Afghanistan. The last trilateral that did take place in Kabul, the Afghan Taliban refused to give a joint statement. And then you saw individually every country giving a statement. And the statement that was given out by the Afghan Taliban did not talk about ETIM, did not talk about TTP, and they themselves said that they no longer want to be a part of CPEC as it, travels through disputed territory. So I think you can already see the changes that came about from Kabul itself. And I honestly think that, both countries need to move beyond the Indo-Pak crisis. If you remember when the tensions took place between India and Pakistan, I personally saw many people from Kabul themselves trying to bring Afghanistan into the equation. This has nothing to do with Afghanistan. Pakistan and India are two sovereign countries that have their differences. But that does not mean that a third country needs to be involved, or that a third country needs to jeopardize its relationship to either keep Islamabad happy or New Delhi happy. So I really think that this is an understanding that needs to mature in the Afghan mindset. Honestly, I think a lot of water has flown under the bridge, and Pakistan has accepted that Afghanistan and India have a historical relationship, and it has always existed. It should exist as long as it's not detrimental to Pakistan. So I think it was just pure coincidence, but I think more importantly, the facts seem to be, brushed under the carpet, where we were facing attacks left, right, and center, even during the days of Mutaki's visit to India.
What do you how do you see like some of the statements, especially,
Mm,
for example, from your defense minister
mm,
who said that the Taliban are like India's proxy?
mm. Ali,
So you think,
yes, no, I just feel that I am not a spokesperson for our defense minister. He's entitled to his opinions, but let me just say that I do not agree with a lot of the things that our defense minister says. Uh, Likewise, you have people sitting across the border in Kabul who also make, I think, careless statements. And I think this is, sitting in such positions, I think we have to be very careful about the bigger picture, and we have to not let emotions get in the way. So, I will leave it at that. I'm sure you can always try and get an interview with our defense minister, and, he can answer why he says what he says. I don't necessarily agree to, the statements that he has given.
uh, okay. Um, I think there have been 4 rounds of talks so far, mediated by Qatar first, and then 2 rounds of talks mediated or hosted by Turkey in Istanbul, and the last one was quietly mediated by Saudi Arabia. It was not publicly acknowledged, and this is probably because the third round ended in failure in Istanbul. So, could you explain where they stand in terms of negotiations? What are the obstacles to an
Mm,
agreement, or what are the prospects of an agreement on a more sustainable ceasefire? Of course, after the negotiations in Qatar, they agreed to a preliminary ceasefire, which has been extended in the subsequent talks. But we really do not have a more sustainable ceasefire, and the ceasefire is not holding because on
mm,
5 December, there were reports of cross-border attacks. Uh, what is the role of the mediators?
mm,
And you also mentioned the Afghanistan, Pakistan, and China trilateral dialogue of foreign ministers, which has been taking place since 2017 and resumed under the Taliban in 2023. Is there a chance for China to play a role,
mm.
taken together?
Hmm. Well, yes, let me start from your last point. Sadly, the ceasefire hasn't held its place because on and off we have seen continuous attacks from the TTP across the border, and we continue to see casualties amongst our security forces. So, to be very honest with you, that I don't feel that you know Kabul has been then fulfilling its promise of a ceasefire. But to be fair, I think Pakistan has continued, to follow, you know, on the advice of the negotiators and exhibit strategic patience. But my concern always is that, again, if the attacks continue to increase, naturally, then you're going to see a reaction from Pakistan. And I think that's obviously going to be detrimental to the ceasefire. Number one. Number two, I think, yes, while we welcome Qatar's role, Turkey's role, and Saudi Arabia's role, but I actually think that, too many cooks spoil the broth. To be very honest with you, this is a situation that can only be resolved between Kabul and Islamabad. But there has to be willingness. No matter how many mediators get themselves involved, if you do not have commitment on either side, this relationship cannot move forward. Again, I will say that the only problem that exists between these two countries is the expectation that Pakistan has that there will be at least security from its western side. Uh, the Afghan Taliban do not seem to take this particular concern of Pakistan seriously. And I just feel that unless and until this issue isn't taken seriously by those sitting in Kabul, I don't feel that any sort of mediation can help because, again, why did the mediation process or the facilitation process fail? Because Kabul was not willing to pen down written commitments regarding this particular issue. And unless and until we don't have full commitment from Kabul, I feel that this is going to be an exercise in futility. And my concern is more about the people of these two countries, because at the end of the day, it's the people that suffer. We've seen with the closure of the border, it has affected both sides tremendously. The trade, communities on both sides are constantly reaching out to their government saying that, you have to move beyond this and reopen the border. Uh, Afghanistan already is in a very difficult situation in terms of the humanitarian crisis, also with the repatriation of the refugees and, the winter months. So I really think that, focus should be on the common man, which is always, compromised in this particular situation. The Chinese, again, they did, if you remember, the trilateral again was reinitiated because Pakistan and Afghanistan had problems on this very issue of the TTP. And they were able to bring about engagement. But I think the last trilateral, and I think Kabul's signals were very, very, showing of where Kabul is headed right now in terms of the fact that they did not mention the TTP or the ETIM, and they did not mention Afghanistan's. Again, I will go back to that particular statement where they did not talk about Afghanistan's extension, sorry, CPEC's extension to Afghanistan. I think that's very telling of where the Afghan foreign policy is headed. And if they feel that it should be aligned with India, so be it. But I think they are going to then obviously lose out on relationships because let's not forget, post August 2021, one of the major countries that was engaging with the Afghan Taliban was the Chinese. And the Chinese don't seem to be very happy with the Afghan Taliban right now because, the investments that they had made have been taken back because the differences have arisen between the two, where the Taliban are saying that that the Chinese weren't able to deliver. The Chinese are saying that the Afghan Taliban, certain individuals have been involved in corruption. So that relationship isn't also toeing well. And, this whole India factor, I think it's important to realize that since FM Mutaki's visit, I don't know whether you've noticed, but every time, well, there are statements coming out from Kabul and Pakistan. You now have statements coming out from India, where India is very openly taking a position and going back to its, old mantra of Pakistan being a sponsor or supporter of terrorism. So even if Pakistan does not want to consider the India equation, it has no other choice because now India is very blatantly making these statements in favor of Kabul. So I think we're back to square one as it was 20 years ago. The only difference is that now we have a new actor sitting in Kabul. But again, I will say that the only way this issue can be addressed is if Kabul and Islamabad sit together and find a common ground. And here I have to say that the Afghan Taliban again have to make a decision. I understand it's difficult for them because they are concerned that if they do take any action, whether it's kinetic or otherwise, there will be a repercussion in terms of the TTP joining the ISKP. This is a concern, and we do realize this concern. But I think they they have to see the bigger picture in line. What is more valuable for them? A stable regional environment where Pakistan, whether the Afghans like it or not, is an important player, primarily because of the geographical and ethnic and religious linkages, or if they again want to invest in terrorist elements like the TTP. And let me just add here, sorry, briefly, that it's not just the TTP. If you see now, there's this whole transnational terrorist link that exists within the region, whether it's ETIM/TIP, whether it's, I've heard Al Qaeda, certain remnants of the IMU, then you have the PLA, then you have the TTP. This is a very dangerous trend that is being set. And again, I will say that unless and until there is a collective approach towards counterterrorism and dealing with these terrorist elements, I really don't think we can see this region flourish, and not even Afghanistan. We talk about connectivity projects, trade projects. How do they actually, come into being if you don't have a stable or at least workable relationship between Pakistan and Afghanistan?
Mhm. Uh, there are a lot of like talks of a regime change
Mm,
in Afghanistan. The New Lines magazine reported in November that Islamabad is already planning a regime change, and partly because of the Taliban cultivating closer ties with India.
mm,
And then we had there is a platform called the Ambassadors Lounge. I think it's by Pakistani diplomats. They had a talk show, and the title was "Should Pakistan Go for Regime Change in Afghanistan?" Including with the former ambassador or is Pakistan's former ambassador to Afghanistan. So, and then I think we had the uh, yeah, we had John Achakzai, caretaker minister for information and public relations for government of Balochistan. He said that efforts are underway to unite the armed groups in Afghanistan to fight the Taliban, and that with the help of regional countries, they will launch their campaign in the spring. And he said the realignment was happening rapidly, and the anti-Taliban armed groups had already started receiving support, weapons, and money to fight the Taliban. Uh, do these reports and talks really reflect Taliban's actual intentions in Pakistan's actual intentions and plans,
mm,
or they are just like part of Pakistan's coercive efforts against the Taliban? Uh, uh, or do they really signal a growing realization that Afghanistan under Taliban control cannot contribute to regional peace?
mm, mm,
And many Afghans might all have been already saying that
mm,
Pakistan is now regretting
mm,
supporting the Taliban.
mm. Well, let me just say here that yes, sadly it's an open truth that Pakistan did support the Afghan Taliban. But let's be very honest here. The Afghan Taliban came in through a process. That process is debatable, but it was a Doha process, and it was primarily between the Americans and the Afghan Taliban, and it was endorsed by the international community. So I think this is one point that I did want to raise, that yes, well, Pakistan has certainly supported them. If it was just through the support, then I think the Afghan Taliban should have come into power way more earlier than August 2021. But coming over to this whole concept of regime change, certainly not. This is not, at least from my understanding, something that Pakistan wants, because um, it is not Pakistan's job or role to decide who comes into power in Afghanistan, regardless of what has happened in the past. And I think all regional countries um, have played their role in choosing their favorites. And I don't think this has delivered. I think this has backfired, because there should be no favorites in Afghanistan. Whoever comes into power through the will of the people, that government should be accepted by the region. And Pakistan is no exception to that. So, this whole concept of Pakistan is now working with the opposition or is trying to bring about a regime change. I cannot speak for the government of Pakistan, but from what I know, I don't think this is in the works, and this is not something that anybody in Pakistan uh, favors. Um, Certainly, Pakistan, I will still say, is willing to work with the current dispensation in Afghanistan as we speak, in terms of regional stability, and having Afghanistan contribute to regional stability. Now, this is now for the Afghan Taliban to decide whether they want to be a part of this whole, regional stability aspiration of Pakistan or not. Uh, I again would say here that any notion of having a regime change is not something that Pakistan should be a part of. I think, history has taught us a lot. If something happens organically within
But
Pakistan, within
but
Afghanistan,
but
that's
that's
different. Mm,
kind of your opinion. But
mm. No, but I can
do
speak
this
for,
do these
no,
talks kind of
no,
really?
not at all, because I think if you weigh the pros and the cons, I think having a regime, the only way you can have a regime change in Afghanistan is going to be militarily, it is going to involve kinetics, and it's going to be bloody. And I don't think the region has the appetite for it, including Pakistan, who, despite the fact, has a very, very difficult relationship with Kabul as we speak. But I don't think that this is something that the region can afford. Pakistan is a major player of the region, and this is not something that Pakistan would like. I think you will continue to see a very tense and at times hostile relationship, but certainly I do not think that this is something that is being contemplated by Pakistan. And again, as I said, it will involve the shedding of blood. And I don't think any regional country, including Pakistan, would want that because you're not going to have a peaceful, transition of power.
Yeah. Just the last question. We have only like 2 minutes. Uh, a week after the first round of clashes between the Taliban and Pakistan, there was a meeting of, I think, the Pakistani government, presided by Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif, and they decided to accelerate the expulsion of Afghan
Mm,
refugees.
mm,
Why Pakistan is
mm, mm,
using like the
mm,
refugees
mm.
as a
I,
tool
I,
against the
right.
Taliban.
Let me just tell you, I think this is a policy that I personally do not agree with because I think Pakistan has been an exemplary host in terms of hosting refugees compared to other countries. And I feel that we have undone the goodwill that we have shown over the past 40 years. But at the same time, I do understand the domestic limitations Pakistan has because you see, it's a worldwide phenomena. Countries that are much richer in resources and whatnot are deporting illegal migrants. So I think it's very difficult when you have countries in the West that are doing it because they say now that Afghanistan, Afghan refugees are now economic migrants because they say apparently peace and stability has returned to Afghanistan. It then becomes very difficult for a country like Pakistan, not to do this. I am not in favor of it, but I think there are domestic compulsions within Pakistan. And I think the domestic audience also feels now uh, that they need to focus within and give their own priority, give their own people the priority they need. But I still feel that I think this is something Pakistan should rethink because I don't think expelling refugees will convince the Afghan Taliban to deliver.
Thank you so much, Amina Khan. I hope we will be able to continue this conversation about the issues between the two countries.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.